There was a time when marriage vows meant something absolute, when the words, forsaking all others, weren't just ceremonial but sacred. But what happened on Family Feud one frigid January afternoon in 2025 would become a moment that reminded everyone watching that some words can never be unsaid, and some betrayals cut so deep they change everything in an instant. When contestant Brian Matthews casually admitted on live television that he missed his ex-girlfriend more than he appreciated his current wife, Steve Harvey didn't just stop smiling. He stopped the entire game. The cameras captured his wife's face crumbling in real time. The audience gasped in collective horror. And what Steve Harvey did next would send a message about respect, loyalty, and the irreversible damage caused by careless cruelty disguised as honesty. If you believe that some truths are meant to stay unspoken, and that marriage deserves protection even from brutal honesty, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel so you never miss stories that defend the sanctity of commitment and basic human decency. Brian Matthews was 36 years old, a financial analyst from Charlotte, North Carolina, with the kind of smug confidence that often accompanies people who mistake intelligence for wisdom. He stood on the Family Feud stage wearing an expensive button-down shirt, his posture relaxed, his expression suggesting he found the whole game show experience mildly amusing rather than exciting. Next to him stood his wife of 4 years, Rachel Matthews, a 33-year-old elementary school teacher whose warm smile had always been her most beautiful feature, though it looked strained today in a way only those who knew her well would notice. Rachel had grown up in a military family, moving every few years throughout her childhood. Her father was a career Army officer who taught her about duty, honor, and commitment. Her mother had been the steady presence who made each new house feel like home, who showed Rachel that strength meant adapting while maintaining your core values. Rachel had learned early that love meant choosing someone and standing by that choice through deployments, relocations, and challenges that would break lesser bonds. She had met Brian 5 years ago at a charity fundraiser. He was successful, well-spoken, and pursued her with focused intensity. He told her she was different from anyone he had dated, that she grounded him, that she made him want to be better. They dated for 8 months before he proposed with an elaborate plan involving her favorite restaurant and a flash mob she found embarrassing but appreciated the effort behind. Their wedding had been beautiful, traditional, everything Rachel had dreamed of since she was a little girl. Brian's vows had been eloquent, promising to love her above all others, to choose her every day, to build a life together that honored both their dreams. Rachel had believed every word because she wanted to, because the alternative was too painful to consider. But marriage to Brian had been different than dating Brian. The focused attention he had showered on her during courtship evaporated once they signed the marriage certificate. He worked long hours, traveled frequently for business, and when he was home, he was often distracted, distant, not quite present. Rachel told herself this was normal, that the honeymoon phase had to end eventually, that this was just adult life. What Rachel didn't know was that Brian had never fully gotten over his ex-girlfriend, Melissa. They had dated for 3 years in his late 20s, a passionate, tumultuous relationship that ended badly when Melissa moved to California for a job opportunity, and Brian refused to follow. He had been devastated, drinking too much, unable to focus on work, convinced he had lost the love of his life. In the years since, Brian had rebuilt himself, dated other women, eventually met and married Rachel. But Melissa remained an unhealed wound, an idealized memory that grew more perfect with distance. He followed her on social media, though he had hidden this from Rachel. He knew she had gotten married 2 years ago, had recently had a baby, was living the life he had sometimes imagined having with her. Brian had convinced himself that what he felt for Melissa was just nostalgia, that it didn't diminish what he felt for Rachel. But the truth was more complicated and more painful. He had married Rachel because she was safe, stable, the kind of woman you were supposed to marry. But his heart had never fully let go of Melissa, the one who got away, the relationship that felt like unfinished business. Rachel sensed something was off in their marriage but couldn't identify what. Brian was faithful in the technical sense. He didn't cheat, didn't lie about where he was. But there was an emotional distance that Rachel couldn't bridge no matter how hard she tried. When she planned special dates, Brian seemed to go through the motions. When she tried to talk about their future, having children, buying a house, he was non-committal. When she asked if he was happy, he said he was fine, but fine felt like a devastating assessment of a marriage that should be more. The Family Feud appearance had been Rachel's idea. She thought maybe doing something fun together, creating a shared experience, might help reconnect them. Brian had agreed with the same mild enthusiasm he brought to most things in their marriage. not opposed, but not particularly excited either. Rachel's sister and two cousins completed their family team, all of them excited for the experience, none of them aware that they were about to witness the moment Rachel's marriage imploded on national television. Standing on that stage, Rachel felt the familiar knot in her stomach that appeared whenever she tried too hard to make Brian engage with their life together. She watched him joke casually with the other family, noticed how he barely looked at her, observed the way he seemed more animated talking to strangers than he ever was with her. But she smiled, played along, hoped that maybe this would be the experience that finally made him see her, really see her, and choose her the way she chose him every single day. What Rachel didn't know was that Brian, in his characteristic thoughtlessness, was about to say something so cruel, so careless, so utterly devastating that it would destroy their marriage in less than 30 seconds. The Matthews family was competing against the Chen family from Seattle, and the game had been proceeding normally. Rachel had answered several questions correctly, her natural warmth coming through even under the studio lights. Brian had contributed a few answers, his analytical mind serving him well in guessing popular survey responses. The family was doing well, building points, enjoying the experience. Steve Harvey was working the crowd during a break, doing his signature banter that made families comfortable and drew out their personalities. He had just finished talking to Rachel's sister about her recent engagement when he moved to Brian and Rachel. "Brian and Rachel, you two have been married for 4 years," Steve said with his trademark smile. 4 years, that's still in the honeymoon phase. Tell me, what do you love most about being married to Rachel, Brian? It was a softball question, the kind of easy setup that let husbands say sweet things about their wives that would make the audience go awe. Brian should have said something simple: Rachel's kindness, her laugh, how she makes every day better. Literally anything kind would have worked. Instead, Brian laughed, a sharp sound that had an edge of something darker in it. "Honestly, Steve, some days I miss my ex-girlfriend more than I appreciate what I have with Rachel." The studio went absolutely silent. It was as if someone had sucked all the oxygen out of the room. Steve Harvey's smile disappeared so completely it was like it had never existed. Rachel's face went through a series of expressions in rapid succession: confusion, disbelief, pain, humiliation, before settling into a mask of frozen devastation. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" Steve asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Brian, seeming to suddenly realize he had crossed a line but unable to stop himself from making it worse, continued. "I mean, Melissa and I had this connection that was just electric, you know. Rachel is great, don't get me wrong, she's stable and supportive, but sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if Melissa hadn't moved away." Rachel's sister stepped forward protectively, her voice shaking with rage. "Brian, what the hell is wrong with you?" The audience began murmuring, a low rumble of shock and disapproval. Steve Harvey held up his hand for quiet, and the studio fell silent again. His face had transformed from jovial host to something much more serious, even angry. "Hold up, hold up, hold up," Steve said, walking closer to Brian. "Did you just tell your wife on national television that you miss your ex-girlfriend more than you appreciate her?" Brian's face reddened as he seemed to finally understand the magnitude of what he had said. "Steve, I was just being honest. You asked me a question and I answered honestly." "No, brother," Steve said, his voice hard. "You weren't being honest, you were being cruel. There's a difference. Honest would be telling your therapist. Honest would be working through those feelings in private. What you just did was humiliate your wife in front of millions of people." Rachel stood perfectly still, tears streaming silently down her face. Her body language had completely changed. Her shoulders had dropped, her arms wrapped around herself protectively, her gaze fixed on the floor as if she could disappear if she just didn't look at anyone. Steve turned to Rachel, his expression softening. "Rachel, honey, I am so sorry. You didn't deserve that. Nobody deserves that." Rachel tried to speak, but her voice broke. She shook her head, unable to form words. Her sister put an arm around her, glaring at Brian with pure hatred. Steve looked back at Brian, and everyone in the studio could see that the host was genuinely angry now, not playing for the cameras, but truly upset by what had just occurred. "Brian, I need you to understand something. What you just said to your wife isn't a minor mistake. It's not a slip of the tongue. It's the kind of statement that destroys marriages, that breaks people's hearts, that can never be taken back." Brian tried to defend himself. "I was just answering your question. You wanted to know what I love about being married. And instead of saying literally anything about your wife, you talked about your ex-girlfriend," Steve interrupted, his voice rising. "Your wife is standing right here, and you just told her and the entire world that she's second choice, that you settled, that you think about another woman. How is that appropriate in any universe?" The audience began applauding Steve's words, supporting his confrontation of Brian's cruelty. Rachel's cousins had gathered around her now, creating a protective circle while she fell apart. Steve made a decision. I'm going to do something I've never done in all my years of hosting this show. I'm going to stop this game, right now, because what just happened isn't entertainment, it's devastation, and I will not continue playing a game while a woman's heart is breaking on my stage. He signaled to the producers, who looked shocked but nodded. Steve addressed the cameras directly. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a break. The Matthews family situation needs to be addressed before we can continue, if we continue at all. As producers called for a break, Rachel finally found her voice. She looked directly at Brian for the first time since his confession, and her words cut through the studio like a knife. 4 years, Brian. 4 years I've tried to make you happy. I've supported your career, moved for your job, put my own dreams on hold. I've cooked dinners you barely touched, planned dates you seemed bored by, asked you questions you answered in monosyllables. And now I know why. I was never who you actually wanted. I was just the consolation prize after Melissa left. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, pain transforming into righteous anger. Do you know what hurts most? Not that you think about her. People have exes, that's normal. What hurts is that you married me anyway. You said vows to me that you didn't mean. You let me believe we were building a life together when really I was just filling a space meant for someone else. Brian tried to interrupt. Rachel, that's not... Don't, Rachel said sharply. Don't you dare try to minimize this now. You just told the entire world that you settled for me, that every day we've been married, you've been wishing you were with her instead. How am I supposed to come back from that? How am I supposed to ever believe anything you say again? Steve Harvey, watching this unfold, stepped in gently. Rachel, what do you need right now? Do you want to continue this conversation in private, or do you need to leave? Rachel looked around at the studio, at the cameras, at the audience watching her marriage disintegrate in real time. I need to leave. I can't be here. I can't look at him right now. She turned to her sister and cousins. Can we please just go? Steve nodded to his staff. Of course, take all the time you need. We'll make sure you have transportation and anything else you need. As Rachel and her family began to move toward the exit, Brian finally seemed to grasp the full consequences of what he had done. Rachel, wait, please let me explain. Rachel stopped but didn't turn around. Explain what, Brian? That you've been thinking about your ex our entire marriage, that I'm not enough for you, that you wish you had married someone else. You already explained all of that pretty clearly. I don't need to hear anything else. She walked off the stage, her sister and cousins surrounding her protectively. Brian stood alone, the weight of what he had destroyed finally settling on his shoulders. Steve Harvey stood in the center of the stage, and for a long moment he didn't speak. The studio was silent except for the sound of Rachel's sobs fading as she left the building. The Chen family, who had been standing quietly through the entire confrontation, looked uncomfortable and sympathetic. Brian stood isolated, his earlier smugness completely gone, replaced by what appeared to be dawning horror at what he had done. Finally, Steve addressed Brian directly. I want you to understand something. In the 30 seconds it took you to say those words, you destroyed a 4-year marriage. You humiliated a woman who loved you enough to marry you despite the fact that you apparently never got over someone else. You revealed to her and to millions of people that her entire marriage has been a lie. Brian's voice was small. I didn't mean to hurt her. I was just trying to be honest. No, Steve said firmly. Honesty isn't an excuse for cruelty. You want to know what honesty would have looked like. Honesty would have been not marrying Rachel in the first place if you were still in love with your ex. Honesty would have been going to couples therapy to work through these feelings. Honesty would have been literally anything other than what you just did. He continued, his voice heavy with disappointment. You know what the worst part is? You didn't just admit you think about your ex sometimes. You said you miss her more than you appreciate your wife. More. That's not a slip of the tongue. That's a revelation about where your heart has been this whole time, and it's not with the woman who promised to spend her life with you. Steve turned to address the audience and cameras. I want to say something to everyone watching. What we just witnessed is a masterclass in how to destroy trust. Marriage requires many things: commitment, communication, sacrifice. But at its core, marriage requires that your spouse knows they are your first choice, every day, no matter what. When you tell them they're not, when you compare them to someone else and find them lacking, you violate the most basic foundation of that bond. He looked back at Brian. So here's what's going to happen. The game is over for your family. I'm not going to stand here and pretend to continue entertainment while your wife is devastated. The Chen family wins by default, and frankly, that's the least of your concerns right now. Brian tried to speak. Steve, is there anything I can do? How do I fix this? Steve's expression was sad. Brother, I don't know if you can. Some things once said can't be unsaid. Some damage is permanent. You just told your wife that she's been competing with a ghost for 4 years and losing. That's not something you fix with an apology or flowers or grand gestures. He paused, then continued. If you're serious about trying to save your marriage, and honestly, I don't know if it's worth saving from her perspective, you need to do some deep work on yourself. You need to figure out why you married someone you didn't fully love. You need to understand the difference between nostalgia for a past relationship and actual love for a present partner. And you need to be honest with yourself about whether you're capable of giving Rachel what she deserves, which is someone who chooses her first completely, without reservations. Steve's words landed hard. The audience was silent, absorbing the weight of what had transpired. The producers had already stopped filming the main game but kept cameras rolling for this intervention, recognizing that what was happening transcended typical game show content. "Here's what I want you to hear," Steve said, his voice gentler now but still firm. "You have revealed something about yourself today that you can't take back. Whether you stay married or not, you need to reckon with the fact that you're someone who kept a woman in a marriage where she wasn't your first choice. That's not who you want to be, brother. That's not the kind of man any of us should aspire to be." Brian looked destroyed, tears now streaming down his own face. "What do I do now?" "You let Rachel make her own decision about what she needs," Steve said. "You don't pressure her, you don't make this about you and your feelings, you don't try to convince her that she misunderstood or overreacted. You sit with what you did. And if she decides to leave, which she has every right to do, you let her go with whatever dignity you can still muster." Steve then did something unexpected. He asked Brian to leave the stage as well. "I think you need some time to process what just happened. We'll make sure you have transportation, but I need you to leave my stage now." As Brian walked off, Steve turned to the Chen family, who had been watching this entire scene unfold with wide eyes. "I apologize that your Family Feud experience turned into this. You've won the game and you'll get your prize money, but I imagine this isn't how any of you expected today to go." Mrs. Chen, the matriarch of their family, spoke up. "Mr. Harvey, we appreciate your standing up for that young woman. What her husband said was wrong, and she deserved to have someone defend her." Steve nodded gratefully. Then he addressed the studio audience and cameras one final time before ending the taping. "Today you witnessed something that wasn't scripted, wasn't planned, and wasn't entertainment. You watched a marriage end, or at minimum, sustain damage that may be irreparable. I stopped this game because some things matter more than points or prizes. That woman's dignity mattered more. Her pain mattered more. And the message we send about what's acceptable in marriage mattered more." He continued, "If you're watching this and you're in a relationship where you're comparing your partner to someone else, where you're holding on to an ex, where you're making your spouse feel like their second choice, please hear me. That's not fair. Either commit fully or let them go. Don't waste their years making them compete with a memory they can never defeat." The episode aired 6 weeks later, heavily edited but still containing the essential confrontation and Steve's intervention. The network had debated whether to air it at all, but ultimately decided that the message was too important to suppress. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, Team Rachel was trending worldwide. The clip of Brian's confession and Steve Harvey's response went viral, viewed tens of millions of times across all social media platforms. But the conversation that erupted went far deeper than just the viral moment. Relationship therapists praised the segment, calling it a valuable illustration of emotional betrayal and the importance of being fully present in your current relationship. Marriage counselors reported an influx of couples seeking help, many citing the episode as the wake-up call they needed to address issues of comparison and emotional unavailability in their own relationships. Rachel filed for divorce 2 weeks after the taping. In her filing, she cited irreconcilable differences and emotional cruelty. She gave several interviews in the weeks that followed, speaking with remarkable composure about what she had experienced. "The worst part wasn't finding out Brian had feelings for his ex," Rachel explained in one interview. "It was realizing that our entire marriage had been built on a foundation of him settling for me. Every time I tried to connect with him and he seemed distant, it wasn't because he was busy or tired. It was because his heart was somewhere else. How do you come back from that knowledge?" She continued. "People have asked me if I think Brian is a bad person. I don't. I think he's someone who made a terrible choice to marry me when he wasn't ready to fully commit. But that doesn't make what he did less painful. His honesty in that moment wasn't brave, it was selfish. He prioritized saying what he felt over protecting the woman who had committed her life to him." Brian also gave interviews, though they were met with far less sympathy. He claimed he had made a terrible mistake, that he loved Rachel, that he wanted to fix their marriage. But when pressed, he couldn't convincingly explain why he had married her while still carrying feelings for someone else. "I thought I was over Melissa," Brian said in one interview. "I thought what I felt for Rachel was enough. But I realize now that I confused comfort with love, stability with passion. Rachel deserved someone who chose her first completely, and I failed her in that. His admission, while perhaps honest, did nothing to repair the damage. If anything, it confirmed what Rachel already knew, that she had never been his first choice, and no amount of remorse could change that fundamental betrayal. Steve Harvey invited Rachel back to his talk show 3 months after the Family Feud incident. The transformation in her was visible. She carried herself differently, still wounded, but with a strength that hadn't been evident during the original taping. "How are you doing?" Steve asked her during the interview. "I'm healing," Rachel said simply. "It's been incredibly painful. I spent 4 years building a life with someone who wasn't fully present in that life, but I'm also relieved. I'm not trying to make someone love me anymore. I'm not wondering why my best efforts never seem to be enough. I know now it wasn't about me being insufficient. It was about Brian not being ready to fully commit to anyone." Steve nodded. "What would you say to other people who are in relationships where they feel like they're competing with an ex or a fantasy?" Rachel's response was powerful. "Trust your instincts. If you feel like your partner is somewhere else emotionally, they probably are. And you deserve better than someone who's with you physically but mentally and emotionally checked out. Don't waste your years trying to compete with a ghost. You'll never win that competition because the person you're competing with isn't real anymore. They're a memory, an idealized fantasy that gets better with time, while you, a real person with real flaws, can never measure up." The interview touched millions of viewers, many of whom saw their own situations reflected in Rachel's story. She received thousands of messages from people thanking her for her honesty, for putting words to the painful experience of being someone's second choice. Rachel also used her platform to highlight the less obvious forms of emotional betrayal in relationships. "We talk a lot about physical cheating," she said in one interview. "But emotional unavailability, comparison to exes, making your partner feel inadequate, those are betrayals too. It might not be as obvious, but they're just as damaging to the foundation of trust that marriage requires." The divorce was finalized 6 months after the Family Feud taping. Rachel moved to a new city for a fresh start, taking a teaching position at a well-regarded private school. She focused on rebuilding her identity outside of her failed marriage, reconnecting with friends she had neglected, pursuing hobbies she had abandoned, rediscovering who she was when she wasn't trying to make someone love her. Brian, for his part, struggled in the aftermath. His confession had made him something of a pariah in their social circles. Friends sided with Rachel, and Brian found himself isolated, facing the consequences of his public cruelty. He reported reaching out to Melissa, the ex-girlfriend he had pined for, but she had made clear she wasn't interested in rekindling anything with him. The fantasy he had held onto for years evaporated when confronted with reality. 1 year after the incident, Rachel was invited to speak at a conference on healthy relationships. In her keynote speech, she talked about the importance of being someone's first choice. "In a healthy relationship," she said, "you should never feel like you're competing for your partner's attention, affection, or commitment. You should be their first choice clearly and consistently. Not perfect, we're all human, but primary. When you're constantly wondering if you measure up, when you feel like you're auditioning for a role that someone else is still occupying in your partner's heart, that's not a relationship. That's torture." She concluded with words that would be quoted widely. "Brian taught me a painful but valuable lesson. Some people will marry you not because they choose you, but because they can't have who they really want. Don't be someone's backup plan. Don't be someone's consolation prize. Wait for someone who chooses you first completely, without reservations or comparisons. That's what you deserve, and settling for less is a slow death of your spirit." The Family Feud episode became a touchstone in discussions about emotional fidelity and the importance of being fully present in your current relationship. Universities used it in relationship psychology courses. Therapists showed it to clients to illustrate concepts of emotional unavailability and comparison. It sparked countless conversations between couples about exes, fantasies, and the work required to choose your partner every day. Steve Harvey often referenced the incident in his talks about relationships and marriage. "I've seen a lot in my years of hosting," he would say, "but watching Brian destroy his marriage with one careless, cruel admission reminded me that words have power. You can't unsay them. You can't take them back. And sometimes they reveal truths that end relationships because those truths should have prevented the relationship from starting in the first place." 5 years after the incident, Rachel had rebuilt her life completely. She was thriving in her career, had a strong community of friends, and was dating someone new who made her feel valued and chosen. When asked about the Family Feud experience in interviews, she spoke about it with perspective. "It was the worst day of my life," she said, "but it was also liberating. Brian revealed the truth that I had been sensing for years but couldn't quite name. He set me free even though that wasn't his intention. I don't thank him for the humiliation or the pain, but I'm grateful that I didn't waste another decade with someone who didn't fully want me. She continued, "The person I'm with now chooses me every day. I never wonder if he's thinking about someone else. I never feel like I'm competing for his attention or affection. That's what healthy love feels like, and I never would have found it if I'd stayed in a marriage with Brian." Brian never fully recovered his reputation or his sense of self after the incident. He became a cautionary tale, the example of what happens when you marry someone while still emotionally attached to an ex. In rare interviews years later, he expressed remorse for what he had done to Rachel, though his remorse couldn't undo the damage or give her back the years she had invested in their marriage. The story of what happened on that Family Feud stage became more than just a viral moment. It became a cultural reference point for discussions about emotional fidelity, the importance of letting go of the past, and the work required to be fully present with your current partner. If Rachel's story resonates with you, if you've ever felt like you're competing with an ex or a fantasy, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Share it with someone who might need to hear that they deserve to be someone's first choice, not their backup plan. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do for ourselves is walk away from relationships where we're not fully valued. Rachel often said that she wished the Family Feud incident had never happened, that Brian had either fully committed to their marriage or never married her in the first place. But she also acknowledged that without that public moment of devastation, she might have stayed for years longer, convincing herself that his emotional distance was normal, that she was asking for too much by wanting to be truly chosen. The legacy of that day when Steve Harvey stopped the game lives on in the conversations it sparked, the relationships it helped people leave, and the standards it helped people raise for what they would accept in partnership. It proved that sometimes public humiliation can be a catalyst for private liberation, that the worst moments can lead to the best decisions, and that being someone's second choice is never better than being alone. Steve Harvey's decision that day sent a clear message. Some things matter more than entertainment. Rachel's dignity mattered more than finishing a game. The truth about emotional betrayal mattered more than ratings, and standing up for someone whose partner had just humiliated them mattered more than avoiding uncomfortable confrontations. Rachel's story is ultimately one of self-discovery and reclaimed worth. It's about recognizing when you're in a relationship where you're not truly valued and having the courage to walk away. It's about refusing to compete with ghosts and memories. It's about knowing that you deserve someone who chooses you first, completely, every single day. The Family Feud stage had witnessed her humiliation, but it had also witnessed the beginning of her liberation. And in the years that followed, Rachel would build a life that honored both the pain she had endured and the strength it took to walk away from someone who never fully chose her. That's the real legacy of that unforgettable day when a careless husband revealed a devastating truth, and Steve Harvey stopped everything to defend the woman whose heart was breaking on his stage.